Hey everyone! This is the story of how a single dollar turned into an empire, and how a queen refused to be silenced. Before we dive in, make sure to like and subscribe, and welcome to Black Queen Dominion, where strength meets strategy and revenge is never quiet. It all started with a feeling, a gnawing, undeniable sensation that the world underestimated her. The queen knew her worth, but others had built walls of doubt around her. They laughed at her dreams, whispered that her ambitions were too large for her means, and doubted her every move. But she had one thing that none of them could touch: vision. She saw possibilities where others saw obstacles, opportunities where others saw risk. That vision was a seed, and $1,000 was the soil she chose to plant it in. She didn't have a team, a fancy office, or investors knocking on her door. She had herself, her mind, and a relentless refusal to accept the limits society had tried to place on her. Every dollar she spent was deliberate, each choice calculated with precision, and each failure was a lesson that strengthened her resolve. The world had tried to silence her voice, but she spoke through action. Every step she took was a statement, every success a whisper in the ears of those who doubted her, and every challenge a roar that she would not be contained. The first $1,000 was not easy to acquire. It came from careful budgeting, early morning hustles, and late nights that blurred the lines between exhaustion and ambition. It was money that had been doubted by everyone around her, money that others said would never amount to anything significant. Yet she treated it as sacred, recognizing that true power is not in the size of the capital but in the vision behind it. She started small, testing ideas quietly while the world watched her in obscurity. Every project she touched became a laboratory for innovation, and every setback was a masterclass in resilience. The queen understood that patience was a weapon and timing was her ally. She studied trends others ignored, patterns in consumer behavior, and gaps in the market that were invisible to the untrained eye. It was meticulous work, often invisible to outsiders, but each step built momentum that would later become unstoppable. Critics laughed as she worked from a cramped apartment, surrounded by stacks of notebooks, spreadsheets, and the glow of a laptop screen. They couldn't see the strategy unfolding. They only saw the small beginnings. Yet in those small beginnings lay the blueprint for an empire. She embraced every doubter, every sneer, and every "you'll never succeed" as fuel. Their disbelief became her motivation. Their doubt became her leverage. She knew the power of the silent comeback, and she was just getting started. Her first investment was in something tangible, something that would ripple outward in ways no one expected. She didn't throw the $1,000 into risky schemes or overnight fads. She invested in value, in things that could scale, in ventures that had the potential to grow with her vision. She knew that a single dollar invested wisely could create multiples over time, and that discipline would outlast raw ambition. Every day she woke before the sun, not out of obligation, but because she could not wait to chase her dreams. She became a master of strategy, studying the moves of successful entrepreneurs, learning from those who had risen above the noise, and adapting lessons to fit her unique path. She read voraciously, consumed content strategically, and surrounded herself virtually with mentors she could not yet meet in person. Knowledge became her weapon, and she wielded it with precision. As weeks turned into months, the $1,000 began to grow, not only in capital but in confidence. She learned the rhythm of business, the pulse of consumer desire, and the subtle art of influence. Every small win, every minor milestone, built her reputation quietly but powerfully. She documented progress in private, tracking metrics, analyzing trends, and making adjustments with surgical accuracy. Her critics had no idea that a storm was quietly forming in the background, a storm that would soon demand attention. What truly set her apart was vision paired with patience. She did not rush to prove others wrong immediately. She let the process unfold. She understood that impatience is the enemy of greatness, and that slow, deliberate steps build unshakable foundations. Her $1,000 was not just money. It was a statement, a catalyst for a journey that would rewrite her narrative entirely. The queen also understood that business was not just about numbers. It was about people, influence, and narrative. She began building relationships carefully, identifying allies, and subtly positioning herself in networks that would later amplify her success. She learned the psychology of persuasion, the power of storytelling, and the strength of authenticity. She realized that being underestimated was a superpower, allowing her to move quietly while the world underestimated her impact. Months passed and the first tangible returns began to appear. Small profits, seemingly insignificant at first, were celebrated as markers of momentum. Each reinvestment multiplied the original capital, and every strategic move positioned her for the next level of growth. Her confidence, once fragile and quiet, became fierce and unyielding. She was no longer simply surviving, she was laying the groundwork for dominance. The queen faced doubt not only from outsiders but also from herself. There were nights when fatigue pressed heavily, when uncertainty whispered doubts, and when the fear of failure seemed overwhelming. But she had learned to listen to fear without surrendering to it. Fear became a guidepost, signaling where effort was needed most, and every challenge strengthened her internal resolve. By the end of the first year, her $1,000 had transformed into something far beyond what anyone had imagined. Not yet a million, but undeniably a force. A signal that the queen was here and she would not be stopped. She had proven to herself that beginnings are never permanent, and that greatness does not require approval. It only requires relentless commitment to vision, strategy, and self-belief. And in the quiet moments when critics still laughed and doubted, she smiled. They did not yet know the magnitude of what she was building. They could not yet comprehend the empire forming in plain sight. Every sneer, every whispered doubt, was simply a prelude to the moment they would be silenced. The first chapter of her journey closed not with fanfare, but with quiet dominance. The $1,000 was no longer just money. It was the seed of a kingdom, the spark of a revolution, and a message that the queen strikes back with precision, patience, and power. She knew the road ahead would test her further, but she had already learned the most important lesson. She could rise above anyone's doubts if she trusted herself. And so, as the first chapter of her empire concluded, the queen prepared for the next move, the one that would elevate her from a small victory to a force the world could no longer ignore. She had tasted the first hints of triumph, and she was ready to escalate her vision to new heights. The storm was approaching, and the world would soon witness how the underestimated rise to unstoppable power. The queen had proven to herself that beginnings were only the first step in a much larger game. The $1,000 had sparked a fire, but the true test of her reign was about to begin. She was no longer a hopeful dreamer quietly hustling in the shadows. She was a strategist with a growing vision, and the world would soon feel the ripple of her calculated moves. Every decision now carried weight, every step was deliberate, and every action designed to build an empire that could not be ignored. Her next moves were precise. She reinvested her initial gains with care, focusing on ventures that promised growth, scalability, and long-term impact. The queen had learned that real wealth isn't built on luck, it is engineered. She studied markets that others ignored, industries that seemed saturated, and gaps in services that left consumers frustrated. She had an eye for opportunity that the naysayers could not perceive. To them she was still small, still insignificant. To her, each overlooked corner of the economy was a treasure chest waiting to be unlocked. The queen understood that empire building was about leverage. Leverage of money, leverage of knowledge, and leverage of influence. She began to expand her network, connecting virtually and in person with allies who could provide mentorship, insight, and access to resources she had yet to command. Relationships were not casual, they were strategic. Every connection was chosen with purpose, and every interaction calculated to maximize potential growth. She understood the subtle power of perception. Being underestimated allowed her to maneuver freely, while quietly assembling the pieces of her empire. One of the first major breakthroughs came from understanding the psychology of value. She recognized that people will invest not only in products or services but in vision and trust. Her business began to evolve from simple transactions into experiences that left clients feeling empowered, respected, and understood. She had tapped into a market of people who were overlooked by traditional industries, and in serving them she created not just revenue but loyalty, an unshakable foundation for future expansion. Challenges emerged as they always do. There were competitors who tried to replicate her ideas, financial hurdles that demanded creative solutions, and logistical nightmares that threatened progress. But the queen faced each obstacle with clarity and composure. She approached setbacks as puzzles to solve rather than barriers to stop her. Each problem forced her to innovate, and each innovation added layers of strength to her emerging empire. Where others panicked, she strategized. Where others stumbled, she advanced. Marketing became a secret weapon. The queen mastered the art of narrative, crafting stories that resonated with audiences while subtly asserting her authority and vision. She knew that influence was built not on loud claims but on the quiet demonstration of expertise and reliability. Her brand became synonymous with empowerment, strategy, and unapologetic ambition. Every post, every campaign, every outreach effort was an extension of the queen herself, a living testament to resilience and ingenuity. As the months progressed, the empire began to grow exponentially. Small profits snowballed into substantial revenue, and her confidence became unshakable. She reinvested strategically, expanding into new markets, testing ideas that others feared to try, and positioning herself where influence and wealth intersected. Her critics had long dismissed her beginnings, but now they were forced to notice the quiet rise of a queen who would not be ignored. Her personal growth mirrored her financial ascent. She trained herself in negotiation, leadership, and strategic thinking, knowing that true power required mastery over both internal and external worlds. She read voraciously, analyzed case studies, and learned from the triumphs and failures of those who had walked the path before her. But she also innovated, creating methods and strategies uniquely suited to her vision. Her approach was both disciplined and creative, rooted in data but guided by intuition. The queen's daily routines were precise. Each morning began with reflection, planning, and focus. She tracked metrics, analyzed trends, and projected outcomes with careful calculation. She maintained clarity of purpose even as the complexity of her empire grew. Every task, from managing finances to cultivating relationships, was approached with intention. In her eyes, every action was a building block, every decision a brick in the foundation of a lasting legacy. Expansion required courage. She moved into new ventures cautiously but decisively, trusting her research and instincts. Risk was no longer a threat but a calculated lever for growth. She invested in teams, delegated tasks strategically, and empowered others to perform at their best while maintaining ultimate control over vision and direction. Leadership became her armor, strategy became her weapon, and resilience her shield. As the queen's influence grew, so did the attention from her critics. The same voices that had laughed at her $1,000 investment now watched with thinly veiled envy and anxiety. They whispered in circles, questioned her methods, and tried to undermine her progress. But she remained unshaken. Their doubt no longer held power, it had become fuel. Every skeptical glance, every whispered criticism, was another reminder that she was rewriting the rules and claiming territory that others believed was beyond her reach. The queen also learned the subtle art of timing. She knew that impact is as much about patience as it is about action. She struck when conditions were optimal, leveraging knowledge, opportunity, and influence to maximize results. This strategic timing multiplied her returns, amplified her authority, and left competitors scrambling to catch up. While others chased immediate gratification, she built enduring success that could withstand market fluctuations, criticism, and unforeseen obstacles. By the end of the second year, the $1,000 that had once seemed modest had transformed into a network of thriving businesses, profitable ventures, and a growing reputation as a force to be reckoned with. She was no longer just a woman with vision. She was a strategist, an innovator, and a queen whose rise demanded recognition. The empire was taking shape, tangible and formidable, yet the queen knew this was only the beginning. She reflected on the journey thus far, the sleepless nights, the calculated risks, the small victories that accumulated into undeniable power. Each moment of doubt she had faced, whether from herself or others, had been an opportunity to strengthen her resolve. Every obstacle had been a lesson in strategy, patience, and the art of the comeback. And as she prepared for the next stage of her empire, she recognized the pattern of growth. Small beginnings, deliberate actions, and relentless pursuit of vision lead to unstoppable influence. The queen's empire was no longer invisible. It had a presence, a reputation, and a story. And stories, she knew, are powerful. They change perception, inspire loyalty, and silence critics without a single confrontation. Her narrative was clear. They had underestimated her at $1,000, and now, at every step of growth, she was proving that power, strategy, and resilience cannot be silenced. And yet, the most important moves were still ahead. Expansion into new markets, influence over broader networks, and scaling operations beyond imagination required precision and courage. She had proven herself capable of transforming modest beginnings into formidable success, but the challenge now was to multiply that impact, to turn profit into empire and influence into dominance. The Queen's journey continued not in leaps but in strategic, powerful steps. Every move calculated, every action deliberate, every decision designed to build a legacy that would outlast doubters, obstacles, and the limitations society once tried to place on her. She was no longer building for survival. She was building for immortality, for dominance, and for the silent satisfaction of proving that they could not silence a queen with vision. The second chapter closed on a note of undeniable momentum. The Queen had transformed a modest $1,000 into multiple ventures, influence networks, and a strategy-driven empire. Critics had begun to notice, but the Queen remained several moves ahead, quietly but relentlessly preparing for the next stage. The rise to $1 million, the consolidation of power, and the ultimate strike that would leave the world in awe of her unstoppable ascent. The Queen had grown accustomed to silence in the beginning, the doubters and skeptics fading into background noise. But as her empire expanded, the whispers became uneasy murmurs, and murmurs became attention she could no longer ignore. Her success, once invisible, was now visible. Every milestone she reached, every strategy she executed, every profit she claimed, made the world take notice. The $1,000 that had been dismissed as insignificant had evolved into multiple thriving ventures, each a testament to her foresight, discipline, and unshakable self-belief. And now the stakes were higher than ever. By the third year, the Queen was no longer satisfied with incremental growth. She had tasted the power of strategic wins and understood that the difference between the ordinary and the extraordinary was scale. To rise from a self-made entrepreneur to a millionaire, she would need not just strategy but audacity. Every decision, every investment, every expansion plan had to align perfectly. She knew that in this stage hesitation could be costly, and missteps could invite criticism louder than before. But the Queen was ready. She had been preparing for this moment all along. Scaling her empire meant leveraging the foundations she had meticulously built. Her initial ventures were strong, but they needed optimization and reach. She began analyzing operations with a microscope, identifying areas for automation, efficiency, and maximum profitability. She understood that growth was not just about revenue. It was about building systems that could function even when she wasn't directly involved. Each process she optimized became a new pillar of strength, fortifying her position and freeing her to pursue bigger opportunities. Marketing evolved into a powerful force. The Queen didn't just sell products or services. She sold influence, identity, and aspiration. Her campaigns became cultural signals, speaking directly to audiences who had long been overlooked, ignored, or underestimated. Her brand became a beacon, and every new customer, client, or partner became a ripple in her growing network of influence. The empire wasn't just making money. It was making statements, rewriting expectations, and commanding attention. The Queen faced resistance as she always did. Established competitors scoffed at her approach, attempting to imitate her strategies without understanding the precision behind them. She watched carefully, learning from their missteps, identifying weaknesses, and adjusting her tactics to stay multiple moves ahead. She knew that being underestimated was her advantage. While others overextended or acted impulsively, she moved deliberately, calculating risk, and ensuring every investment had a high probability of multiplying. Financial growth accelerated, but the Queen remained grounded. She reinvested profits strategically, expanding into complementary sectors and exploring scalable ventures with untapped potential. Each decision was backed by data, research, and intuition refined through years of disciplined observation. She balanced innovation with caution, ensuring that every leap forward was supported by solid footing. In this way, she grew not only wealth but credibility, a dual power that left skeptics speechless and allies inspired. Personal growth mirrored business expansion. The Queen honed leadership skills, learning how to inspire, motivate, and delegate. She cultivated a team that shared her vision, instilled accountability, and amplified her reach without compromising her standards. She understood that wealth alone was not enough. Influence, loyalty, and strategic alliances were equally important. Her empire now had faces, stories, and networks that added layers of protection and opportunity. She had become not just a businesswoman, but a force capable of commanding respect across industries. Challenges escalated. Legal hurdles, unexpected market shifts, and competitors' aggressive tactics tested her mettle. But the queen thrived under pressure. She viewed obstacles as opportunities disguised in complexity, transforming potential threats into avenues for growth. Every setback became a lesson, every failure a tool, and every criticism an indicator that she was moving in the right direction. Where others saw risk, she saw leverage. Where others panicked, she found clarity. The financial numbers began to tell a story louder than words. Profits multiplied, ventures expanded, and the queen's influence penetrated markets she had once only dreamed of. By mid-year, she crossed a symbolic threshold: $100,000 in capital. It was a moment of validation, a tangible marker of how far she had come from that initial $1,000 investment. Yet she knew this was only a stepping stone. True power, the millionaire threshold, was still ahead, and it demanded sharper strategy, greater focus, and unrelenting execution. The queen's strategy evolved into mastery of timing. She launched campaigns when demand was peaking, entered markets when competitors were complacent, and leveraged opportunities when others were distracted. Each move was calculated, deliberate, and precise. She understood that wealth at this level was not created by luck, but by orchestrating circumstances where probability favored her vision. The world was beginning to notice, but she was far from finished. Every success magnified her influence. She became a symbol to those who had been overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed. Her empire was not just financial. It was cultural, inspiring other women to pursue their visions unapologetically. She understood the multiplier effect of narrative. Her story was proof that audacity, discipline, and strategic thinking could defy societal expectations and leave skeptics in awe. The queen's impact was measured not only in dollars but in the momentum she created for others to rise alongside her. Scaling also required innovation. She identified sectors where her competitors had failed to adapt, gaps where demand outpaced supply, and trends that others dismissed as fleeting. She leveraged technology, outsourced strategically, and automated processes that would otherwise consume her time. Her empire became a living organism, expanding outward in ways that were difficult for outsiders to predict. Each venture complemented another, creating a network effect that amplified revenue, influence, and authority. The queen faced moments of doubt as any human would. The weight of responsibility, the pressure of expectation, and the complexity of operations sometimes threatened to overwhelm. But she had cultivated resilience. Fear became a tool and pressure became motivation. Every sleepless night, every strategic decision, and every challenge faced head-on reinforced her unshakable belief. She would reach the millionaire mark, and she would do it on her terms, silent to criticism, loud in results. By the end of the third year, the queen had achieved what many had deemed impossible. The $1,000 that once seemed trivial had grown into a seven-figure trajectory. Her empire was visible, influential, and respected. Competitors and critics who once mocked her efforts now watched in disbelief, unable to comprehend how a queen, underestimated and dismissed, had built such unstoppable momentum. Her empire was not just about money, it was about strategy, vision, and the unshakable confidence that comes from trusting oneself. And yet, even as she approached the millionaire threshold, the queen knew that wealth alone was not the ultimate prize. Power, influence, and legacy mattered more. She began positioning her empire not just for growth, but for enduring dominance. Every partnership, every acquisition, every investment was carefully evaluated for long-term impact. She was no longer simply growing a business, she was constructing a dynasty. The third chapter closed with the queen standing on the precipice of monumental achievement. She had transformed $1,000 into a complex network of ventures, influence, and financial growth that pointed toward the million-dollar mark. The critics, the doubters, and the naysayers had all been silenced, if only quietly, by her relentless execution. But the queen knew the journey was far from over. The next chapter would demand higher stakes, bolder moves, and the strategic brilliance necessary to solidify her empire and claim the ultimate victory. By the fourth year, the queen was no longer invisible. The quiet whispers of doubt had transformed into uneasy chatter, and chatter had evolved into attention that could no longer be ignored. She had crossed thresholds most people only dreamed of. The $1,000 that had once been laughed at had grown into an intricate web of businesses, investments, and influence. But the journey to true dominance was not complete. This was the stage where empires either solidify or crumble. And the queen was prepared to strike back. The path to $1 million was no longer just about capital. It was about power, perception, and precision. Every move she made was deliberate, designed not just to grow wealth, but to command respect and influence. The queen understood the psychology of success. Those who underestimate her would always do so at their own peril. She positioned herself strategically, not only in business but in culture, leveraging her story as a beacon for those who had been dismissed, silenced, or overlooked. Her empire was no longer financial. It was symbolic. She was proving with every calculated step that queens rise even when the world tries to keep them down. Expansion became aggressive but calculated. The queen diversified, entering industries where her competitors had grown complacent. She invested in scalable ventures that others avoided, capturing untapped markets and creating a network of income streams that multiplied her influence. She was meticulous in her decisions, analyzing trends, evaluating risk, and leveraging data with intuition honed through years of strategic observation. Every dollar invested, every partnership formed, every campaign launched was a precise strike in her quiet war for dominance. As her wealth and influence grew, so too did the envy and resistance of those who had once dismissed her. Competitors attempted to replicate her strategies, yet they lacked the vision, discipline, and patience that defined her approach. They attacked markets she had already secured, only to find themselves outmaneuvered at every turn. The queen remained calm, observing, calculating, and striking only when conditions favored her. Their desperation became her advantage. Their missteps became her opportunities. She understood that real power thrives in the face of opposition. The queen also mastered public narrative. She shared her journey selectively, crafting a persona that exuded confidence, intelligence, and ambition. Her story inspired others, particularly women who had faced systemic doubt and dismissal, to pursue their own visions unapologetically. Through her brand, she amplified the message that audacity, strategy, and resilience are unstoppable forces when combined. Each public success was not merely personal. It was a statement to the world that queens rise, even from the humblest beginnings. Operations expanded rapidly. The queen hired teams, implemented systems, and created processes that allowed her empire to function at scale. She delegated strategically, ensuring that every department operated efficiently while she focused on growth, strategy, and vision. Leadership became her superpower, enabling her to wield influence far beyond her personal reach. She transformed from a solopreneur into a commanding presence, orchestrating a business ecosystem that extended into multiple industries and communities. Challenges continued, but they no longer intimidated her. Legal obstacles, financial pressures, and competitive attacks were met with precision and confidence. The queen had developed the resilience and foresight necessary to navigate complex situations, turning potential threats into opportunities for leverage. Every setback became a lesson, every criticism a tool, and every obstacle a stepping stone toward ultimate success. Her empire was becoming not just profitable but unassailable. By the middle of the fourth year, the queen achieved what many thought impossible. She officially crossed the $1 million mark. It was a milestone that symbolized more than wealth. It was a triumph of strategy, vision, and resilience. The $1,000 that had once been doubted had multiplied 1,000-fold, each dollar a testament to careful planning, calculated risk, and unwavering belief in herself. Critics could no longer dismiss her. The world had no choice but to acknowledge the force she had become. Yet reaching this milestone was not the end, it was a turning point. The queen knew that wealth alone did not define legacy. Influence, dominance, and the ability to shape culture were the true markers of power. She began to leverage her position to expand her impact beyond business, cultivating networks, mentoring emerging talent, and amplifying voices that had been ignored. Her empire became a platform for change, a visible proof that underestimated queens could rise and rewrite the rules. The queen also faced personal tests. With success came pressure, scrutiny, and the occasional betrayal. Not everyone in her orbit had her best interests at heart. Some sought to exploit her success, others to challenge her authority. But the queen had learned to read intentions, anticipate moves, and act decisively. She maintained control of her empire, her narrative, and her vision. She understood that in the world of power, decisiveness and clarity are often the difference between victory and vulnerability. Her strategy evolved into one of legacy. She invested not just in businesses but in relationships, influence, and cultural impact. She identified emerging trends, positioned herself to lead markets before competitors could react, and ensured that her empire had both depth and resilience. She understood that true power was multidimensional. It encompassed wealth, influence, and the ability to shape perception. And she wielded it with precision. The queen's critics had become silent observers. Those who had once mocked her were now watching in awe as she transformed a modest $1,000 into a multifaceted empire. Her rise was a lesson in strategy, patience, and audacity. They could see her victories, but they could not see the careful orchestration, the countless hours of research, planning, and calculated risk that had led to her dominance. She had turned doubt into fuel, criticism into leverage, and invisibility into unstoppable momentum. The fourth chapter of her journey closed with the queen fully aware of her power. She had achieved millionaire status, built an empire that commanded respect, and silenced those who had sought to dismiss her. Yet she remained poised, knowing that the final chapter, the ultimate strike, the consolidation of influence and the cementing of her legacy, was still ahead. The queen had proven that vision, strategy, and resilience could overcome doubt, scarcity, and opposition. And now she was ready for the world to witness the full force of her reign. The queen had arrived at a moment most could only dream of. The $1,000 that once seemed insignificant had grown into an empire worth millions. But this was more than numbers on a balance sheet. It was the culmination of vision, resilience, strategy, and relentless determination. Every step she had taken, every calculated risk, every sleepless night had led to this point. She had transformed herself from the underestimated underdog into a force the world could no longer ignore. Public recognition was inevitable. The media, once indifferent, now sought to tell her story. Headlines celebrated her rise, interviews showcased her insight, and accolades affirmed what she already knew: she was unstoppable. But the queen understood that public attention was both a reward and a tool. She used it strategically, amplifying her influence while continuing to operate with precision behind the scenes. Her story was now both inspiration and a warning. Underestimate a queen at your own peril. Her empire continued to expand, touching industries far beyond her initial ventures. She entered new markets with confidence, guided by research, intuition, and a deep understanding of consumer needs. Every expansion reinforced her brand, and every successful venture added to her legacy. She had moved from being a participant in business to being a leader who shaped trends, defined markets, and set the standard for excellence. Her wealth was now a reflection of her strategic mastery, not just her ambition. Rivals emerged, attempting to challenge her dominance, replicate her strategies, or undermine her influence. But the queen was prepared. She anticipated opposition, adapted swiftly, and struck with precision when necessary. Every move was deliberate, calculated to protect her empire while expanding her reach. She understood that true power is demonstrated not in confrontation but in results. While others chased her, she created systems, networks, and processes that ensured she remained ahead, untouchable, unshakable, and unchallenged. Cultural impact became a cornerstone of her legacy. The queen used her platform to uplift others, particularly women who had been marginalized or overlooked. She mentored emerging entrepreneurs, invested in initiatives that amplified voices often ignored, and became a symbol of resilience, power, and unapologetic ambition. Her empire was more than wealth. It was influence, inspiration, and proof that strategic brilliance could overcome any obstacle. She had become not just a millionaire but a cultural force. The queen also mastered timing, understanding that influence is as much about perception as it is about execution. She launched initiatives when attention was highest, entered markets when competitors were vulnerable, and leveraged momentum to amplify every success. Her actions were precise, purposeful, and calculated to maximize impact. By this point, she had not only reached financial freedom, she had designed a legacy that would last far beyond her immediate successes. Reflection was part of her strength. She looked back at the journey, from the $1,000 that seemed trivial, to sleepless nights filled with research, to calculated risks that doubled, tripled, and multiplied her capital. Every obstacle, every naysayer, every challenge had been transformed into leverage. Her success was a message. No one can define a queen's potential but herself. The empire she had built was proof that vision, strategy, and relentless execution triumph over doubt, limitation, and fear. By the 5th year, the queen's influence was felt globally. Her ventures dominated markets, her strategies were studied by aspiring entrepreneurs, and her story inspired countless others to pursue their own ambitions fearlessly. She had become a symbol, a living testament to what is possible when determination meets strategy, when resilience meets opportunity, and when ambition is paired with intelligence. Her rise was not only financial, it was transformative, reshaping perceptions and expectations for generations to come. Her rivals, who had once laughed at the $1,000, now watched in silence. Some tried to imitate, some tried to challenge, but none could replicate the combination of vision, timing, and audacity that defined her. She had created something beyond replication, a blueprint of power rooted in authenticity, strategy, and relentless action. Every dollar, every decision, every victory was evidence of a queen who refused to be silenced and refused to be stopped. The queen also embraced mentorship and empowerment. She created networks for women, invested in programs that promoted financial literacy, entrepreneurship, and leadership, and shared her insights freely with those ready to learn. Her empire was a platform for others to rise, proving that true power multiplies when shared. Legacy, she understood, was not only about wealth, it was about impact, influence, and the lives elevated along the way. In private moments, she reflected on the journey. The sleepless nights, the doubters, the calculated risks. All of it had shaped her into a leader, an innovator, and a queen whose story would be remembered. She had transformed scarcity into abundance, skepticism into validation, and small beginnings into monumental success. Her empire was not just her own. It was a symbol of what is possible when determination meets intelligence, courage meets strategy, and vision meets execution. The queen had reached her peak not by chance but by choice. Every decision had been deliberate, every action precise, every obstacle a lesson mastered. She had proven that power is not given, it is earned, engineered, and claimed. And in claiming her empire, she had sent a message to the world. Underestimating a queen is the gravest mistake one can make. The $1,000 that once seemed small had sparked a revolution, and the world had witnessed its unstoppable rise. As the final chapter of this journey closed, the queen stood not only as a millionaire, but as a symbol of triumph, resilience, and strategic brilliance. She had rewritten her story, silenced her critics, and built an empire that would endure for generations. The queen had struck back, and her legacy was undeniable. Power is claimed, wealth is built, and empires are forged by those bold enough to rise against doubt. The empire she had built was more than wealth. It was influence, inspiration, and a testament to the unshakable strength of a queen who refused to be silenced. From $1,000 to $1 million, from whispered doubts to global recognition, she had achieved the impossible. And in the process, she had transformed not only her life but the possibilities for every woman who dared to dream, rise, and claim her own power. The story concluded with clarity. The underestimated queen had struck back, not with anger but with strategy, patience, and relentless execution. The world had watched, learned, and been forever changed. Her journey from humble beginnings to millionaire status was a blueprint for resilience, vision, and unapologetic ambition. And as she looked to the future, the queen knew her influence would continue to expand, her empire continue to grow, and her legacy would inspire generations to rise unapologetically in their own power.